Close your eyes and imagine Switzerland. What picture just appeared in your mind? Is it the snow-covered slopes glistening under the brilliant sun of the Alps? Is it the surface of Lake Geneva, as still as a giant mirror reflecting a deep blue sky without a single cloud? Herds of cows wearing cowbells leisurely grazing on lush green meadows. Or a craft shop displaying the world's most sophisticated mechanical watches and humanity's sweetest chocolate bars? That is the Switzerland the world has always yearned for. A Switzerland of perfection, peace, luxury, and ultimate prosperity. An earthly paradise that seems to have never had to taste the bitterness of war or the ravages of time. But behind that exquisite postcard, behind that seemingly carefree beauty, lies a completely opposite truth. A truth that is somewhat harsh, cold, and full of calculation. The truth is, nature has never favored this land. Look at the map of the old continent. Switzerland is completely locked in the heart of Europe, without an inch of coastline to reach the ocean for trade. This nation has no brilliant gold mines underground, no black oil wells gushing wealth, and no giant coal or iron ore mines to serve as a launch pad for heavy industry. Worse, more than 70% of its territory consists of jagged, steep, rocky mountains and eternal ice and snow. These are places where planting even a single grain of wheat becomes a desperate effort. In previous centuries, this land sandwiched between these majestic mountain ranges was once one of the poorest places in Europe. A place where poverty once forced the strongest young men to leave their homeland, selling their blood and lives on fierce battlefields as mercenaries. So, what really happened? How could a nation seemingly cursed by nature in terms of geography rise to become one of the strongest economies in the world? How did a land without a single gold mine become a giant gold vault for all of humanity, the place that stores the largest and most secret fortunes of the global elite? And how, in the midst of a Europe constantly torn apart by two devastating world wars, could this tiny country maintain an inviolable neutral status, becoming the safest haven on the planet? Switzerland's wealth and peace today are not a gift fallen from the sky. It is the result of an unprecedented survival strategy, an extreme caution bordering on obsession, and an iron discipline forged through centuries of struggle against adversity. To truly understand Switzerland, we cannot just skim over the quiet lakes or admire the expensive watches in glamorous display cases. We must look deep into the heart of those rocky mountains, entering the darkness of secret underground bunkers dug deep beneath the Alps. Because it is there, beneath layers of white snow and solid rock strata, that the true secrets of this nation are hidden. Welcome to Switzerland, the world's eternal fortress. The Alps are not merely a priceless natural wonder where people come to ski every winter holiday. For the Swiss, the Alps are a pulsing living entity, a great but extremely cruel mother, a prison that confines them but at the same time a supreme guardian deity. Looking down from above, you will see nearly 70% of Switzerland's area covered by massive folds of the Earth's crust, sharp peaks piercing the sky, vertical cliffs slashing across deep valleys. Throughout thousands of years of history, this fiercely divided terrain has created an almost absolute isolation. Before modern mountain crossing railways were opened, traveling from one valley to another in winter was considered a suicidal journey. It was that physical division that gave birth to a unique cultural phenomenon: Hundreds of tiny communities trapped in separate valleys, surviving on their own, governing themselves with no one submitting to another. That was the early seed of the system of autonomous states, also known as cantons, forming the foundation of the modern Swiss state today. They spoke 4 different languages: German, French, Italian, and an ancient, near-extinct language called Romansh. They had their own customs and their own laws, but they were bound together by a common enemy: the harshness of Mother Nature. Winters in the Alps were long and bone-chillingly cold. The thin, barren soil on the long, sliding slopes could not sustain large families. Hunger was a permanent ghost. And when the land beneath their feet could not yield bread, the Swiss were forced to sell the only thing they could produce: their strongest, roughest, and toughest young men. Few know that before becoming a nation of peace and prosperity, Switzerland was once the bloodiest exporter of war on the old continent. Throughout the 15th to the 18th century, Swiss mercenaries was a phrase that sowed terror across every European battlefield. They were called the Reisläufer. Because of extreme poverty, Swiss youths left their villages, donned armor, carried long halberds and giant swords to sell their lives to foreign kings. They fought for France, Spain, for Italian lords, and even the Pope. They did not fight for ideals, nor for religion or patriotism. They fought for cold gold coins to send home to stave off starvation. The common saying in Europe at the time was, "No money, no Swiss." But what made their name was not just being mercenaries, but their brutality and an unbreakable discipline of steel. Swiss soldiers never took prisoners, and they fought to the death rather than surrender. There were extreme tragedies when, on the same battlefield, Swiss mercenaries hired by France had to face and slaughter Swiss mercenaries hired by Italy. Blood money flowed back to the Alps in exchange for the lives of many generations. The only remaining legacy of this bloody era is the Swiss Guard at the Vatican today, those who wear colorful uniforms and hold ancient weapons, yet are among the most elite trained soldiers in the world. After centuries of shedding blood for the wars of others, the Swiss learned a life and death lesson. War may be a business, but bringing war to one's homeland is the ultimate folly. They decided to slam the door shut, declaring permanent neutrality. But they were not so naive as to believe a piece of paper could protect them from the bloodthirsty beasts surrounding them. And so, they set out to build one of the craziest and greatest defense systems in human history. Entering the 20th century, as the flames of World War II scorched all of Europe, Nazi Germany swallowed surrounding nations in the blink of an eye. Swiss territory was completely surrounded by the Axis powers. Adolf Hitler once called Switzerland a pimple on the face of Europe and prepared an invasion plan codenamed Operation Tannenbaum. But Nazi tanks never rolled across the border. Why? Because the Swiss applied the porcupine strategy. Under the command of General Henri Guisan, Switzerland weaponized the Alps themselves. They understood that their small army could not face Germany's massive war machine head-on in the plains. Therefore, their plan was, do not defend the borders. If the enemy surged in, the entire army and government would immediately retreat deep into the remote high mountains. But before leaving, they would destroy their own country with their own hands. Thousands of tons of explosives were secretly installed in every bridge, every railway line, every mountain tunnel, and every vital pass nationwide. With just one push of a button, Switzerland's entire infrastructure would blow up, turning the enemy's advance routes into massive piles of rubble, blocking deep ravines. The passage through Switzerland would be completely severed. It did not stop there. Inside those seemingly harmless granite mountain ranges, the Swiss had silently hollowed out millions of cubic meters of rock to create a massive underground world called Schweizer Reduit, the National Redoubt. There were more than 26,000 hidden bunkers and fortifications. If you stroll through the Swiss hillsides, you might see poetic traditional wooden houses with white lace curtains and geraniums on the balconies. But those are just fakes. Behind those fragile wooden planks is a 2-meter-thick layer of reinforced concrete, and those windows are actually embrasures equipped with anti-tank guns and machine guns pointing directly at the only access roads. Inside the mountain ranges is an entire underground city with hospitals, power plants, ammunition depots, fighter jet hangars, and food reserves capable of sustaining for years. The message Switzerland sent to its enemies was incredibly clear. You may capture the plains, but to enter these mountains, you will have to pay with a sea of blood for every square meter of land. And in the end, all you receive will be nothing but piles of worthless ruins. That horrific deterrence made every great power hesitate. Switzerland does not have an army in the conventional sense. In fact, the entire country of Switzerland is a massive army on standby. The concept of armed peace is deeply ingrained in the psyche of every citizen. To this day, even in peacetime, the Swiss constitution still mandates that every new construction must have a nuclear shelter. This nation of 8 million people possesses a network of bunkers capable of holding 11 million people, reaching a defense ratio of 114% of the population. They sat on those mountain peaks, calmly watching the world undergo the most brutal massacres, because they knew their stone fortress was impregnable. And when the war passed, from the absolute safety of those underground bunkers, they began to use that very silence, discipline, and harsh survival instinct to build an entirely new empire, not with swords and spears, but with watch gears and financial contracts. When the massive steel doors of the military bunkers closed, protecting Switzerland from the fires of war that were consuming the rest of the world, the people here returned to their quiet pace of life. But silence in Switzerland does not equate to stagnation. On the contrary, beneath that peaceful veneer, a giant machine is silently operating with obsessive precision. To understand the soul of Switzerland, you must understand their obsession with time. And that story begins not in modern factories, but during endless winter nights, dark and cold, in the Jura Mountains. In previous centuries, when winter arrived, meters of thick snow blocked every road. Swiss farmers were locked in their wooden houses for months on end. The fields were buried, and the livestock huddled in the barns. They could not farm, nor could they go out to trade. To survive the harsh winter and not starve, they were forced to find a job they could do right beside the family's small fireplace. And they found the answer in microscopic machines: watchmaking. The patience forged from waiting for the ice and snow to melt, combined with the rough but meticulous hands of farmers, created a mechanical miracle. They began grinding tiny gears and assembling hairsprings thinner than human hair. From isolated valleys, Swiss watchmaking was born as a desperate effort to cling to life. But there was another historical factor that sparked this explosion. In the 16th century, the radical religious reformer John Calvin took control of Geneva. Under his ascetic ideology, any display of wealth was considered a sin. Calvin ordered a ban on wearing jewelry. This ban pushed a series of skilled goldsmiths in Geneva to the brink of bankruptcy. However, a legal loophole saved them. Watches were not considered jewelry, but practical items. So, the most talented goldsmiths joined forces with the mountain mechanics. From a survival tool, the Swiss watch became a symbol of power, luxury, and the pinnacle of human intellect. Discipline and perfectionism were ingrained in their blood. However, that great time machine was once nearly crushed completely. Entering the 1970s, the world witnessed the quartz crisis. Japanese manufacturers like Seiko launched battery-powered watches into the market, which were 10,000 times more accurate than Swiss mechanical watches, and so cheap that anyone could buy them. Switzerland's proudest industry collapsed. Thousands of workshops had to close, and tens of thousands of people lost their jobs. It seemed as though the name Swiss-made would be wiped off the world map. Yet, in that very moment, close to death, the cunning survival instinct of the Swiss rose again. They realized they could not compete on low prices, so they repositioned mechanical watches. They transformed it from something to tell time into something to preserve heritage and status. And alongside that, they launched a counterattack named Swatch, colorful, inexpensive plastic watches that still carried the Swiss label. Swatch saved the entire industry, generating massive profits to nurture the luxury mechanical brands once again. They proved that the Swiss are not just conservative in preserving tradition, they are also the sharpest of strategists. And that obsession with precision doesn't just stop at wristwatches. It flows outward, reshaping the entire lifeblood of this nation, the public transport network. If you want to see Swiss order materialized, look at the SBB, the Swiss Federal Railways. Here, punctuality is not a goal to strive for, it is a religion. At every station across Switzerland, you will see the iconic clock with its red second hand topped with a circle. The magic is that this second hand always completes a full rotation in 58.5 seconds. Then it pauses for exactly 1.5 seconds at the 12 o'clock position, waiting for an electrical pulse from the master clock to start the new minute simultaneously across the entire territory. That 1.5 second pause is the heartbeat of Switzerland. Order, synchronization, and zero tolerance for deviation. It's not just trains. Even the most remote villages, perched on 3,000-meter-high cliffs, are connected by the bright yellow postal bus system called Postbus. These buses climb steep, winding hairpin mountain passes with minute-by-minute precision. Their signature three-tone horn echoing through snowy ravines not only signals the arrival of the bus, but also carries a tacit commitment from the state. No matter how remote you are in the mountains, you are not left behind. They drilled through the Alps to build railways. But when it comes to the true talent of the Swiss, we are entering a darker, more secret, and most controversial territory: the profession of keeping money. From mercenaries selling blood for gold, the Swiss realized a sharp truth. Instead of going to the battlefield to bleed for money, why not let the world's money flow here on its own, into the absolute safety of impenetrable bunkers? The most expensive commodity that Switzerland exports to the world is not chocolate, nor is it watches or pharmaceuticals. Their most expensive commodity is silence. In 1934, against the backdrop of Europe simmering on the brink of war, the Swiss government passed the Banking Secrecy Act. This law made disclosing a client's identity to any third party a criminal offense. The birth of numbered accounts turned Swiss banks into the world's black box. Your name would be erased, replaced by an anonymous string of numbers. Political neutrality combined with the 1934 Act created an absolute safe haven. Monarchs and high-profile entrepreneurs brought their assets here. But darkness also seeped in along with the money. Those anonymous accounts did not distinguish between clean and dirty money. They became safes for massive tax evaders, ruthless dictators, criminal gangs, and even gold stolen by the Nazis. Swiss prosperity in the 20th century was tied to a thorny moral question. However, that great wall of silence could not stand forever. Under immense pressure from the U.S. Department of Justice and international anti-tax evasion organizations after the 2008 financial crisis, Switzerland was forced to compromise. The legendary banking secrecy law was pierced. Thousands of client names were handed over. The era of suitcases full of cash with no questions asked has ended. However, instead of collapsing, the Swiss financial system was reborn once more, transforming from selling shady secrecy to selling extremely sophisticated wealth management services. Every major change in this country, whether it is amending banking laws or deciding to join the United Nations, does not lie in the hands of a powerful president. Real power lies in the hands of ordinary citizens through the direct democracy system. On average, 4 times a year, Swiss citizens receive red envelopes sent to their homes. They have the right to vote to decide almost everything, from whether to change the constitution, whether to buy new fighter jets for the military, executive salary caps, to whether cows should be allowed to keep their natural horns. By allowing every voice to be heard and voted upon, all social conflicts are smoothed over before they can erupt into riots. But living in a perfect machine for too long, that order begins to create unwritten rules that govern every breath of the people. Democracy comes with a culture of microcontrol to an unbelievable degree. In Switzerland, on Sundays, you are not allowed to mow the lawn, you cannot wash your car, and even in some apartment buildings, flushing the toilet after 10 at night is considered inconsiderate because it creates noise. You cannot throw away trash without buying the specific type of expensive, government-taxed garbage bags called Zuri-Sack. If you dispose of it incorrectly, trash police will pick through every scrap of paper in your garbage bag to find a bill or letter with your name on it, and a massive fine will be sent to your home. Neighbors will not hesitate to call the police if you park just a few centimeters out of line. This iron discipline helped them survive the Alpine winters and craft the most perfect watches, but it also inadvertently imprisons their souls in an invisible glass cage. Behind the velvet curtain of prosperity and order, cracks are silently appearing. Is perfection a burden too heavy to bear? There is a cruel paradox about perfection. When everything around you operates so smoothly that it is flawless, when trains always arrive to the second, streets don't have a speck of dust, and the economy never knows a crisis, then the only variable that can deviate, the only variable that can fail, is yourself. Welcome to the flip side of the great incubator named Switzerland. For many years, Switzerland has consistently ranked among the world's happiest countries. But at the same time, in global surveys for foreigners, Expat Insider, this country also consistently ranks last in the category of ease of settling in and finding friends. Within Swiss society, there exists a concept called Bünzli, a Swiss-German slang term used to describe citizens who are rigidly rule-abiding, narrow-minded, and obsessed with monitoring others. If you take out the trash on the wrong day, if your curtains are not hung according to standards, or if you happen to turn on the washing machine on a Sunday afternoon, you will not receive a gentle reminder. Instead, you will receive an anonymous note posted on your door, or worse, the police will knock on your door because an anonymous neighbor called to report you. This invisible surveillance creates immense psychological pressure. People live in mutual wariness. Friendship in Switzerland is likened to cracking a walnut, an extremely rigid and cold outer shell that takes many years to penetrate. Loneliness is a chronic illness silently creeping through the most expensive apartments in Europe. Once you slip from the grind of excellence, this society has little room for tolerance. And if you are an immigrant dreaming of becoming a Swiss citizen, prepare yourself for one of the toughest and strangest tests in the world. More than 25% of Switzerland's population is currently foreign. This workforce is the lifeblood that keeps the economy running. But to truly be considered Swiss, paying taxes in full or speaking the local language fluently is not enough. Unlike the US or Canada, where citizenship is granted by the federal government, in some Swiss cantons, the decision on whether or not you can naturalize lies in the hands of your neighbors. The local council will interview you with extremely detailed questions. Do you know the name of the flower that grows on the mountain behind the village? Do you know what time the butcher shop in town closes? History has even recorded absurd yet bitter cases. A Dutch animal rights activist, despite living in Switzerland since the age of 8, was still denied citizenship by the village council just because she spoke out against wearing giant cowbells on grazing cows, arguing it was animal cruelty. In the eyes of the villagers, opposing local tradition meant she was unworthy of being Swiss. The Alpine fortress is not only defended by concrete and guns, it is defended by cultural barriers so solid they are suffocating. But there is a contradiction even greater than that. A hypocrisy on a global scale, carefully hidden beneath crystal-clear lakes and pristine white peaks. We often think Switzerland is wealthy thanks to watches, pharmaceuticals, and banks. But there is another shadow industry that generates trillions of dollars in revenue every year that they never want to advertise on tourist postcards. Commodity trading. Face this truth. Switzerland has no copper mines, no crude oil wells, and does not grow a single cocoa tree or coffee bean. Yet, Swiss-based companies control 1/3 of the oil volume, 1/4 of agricultural products, and most of the essential metals traded worldwide. The faceless giant companies behind quiet buildings in Zug or Geneva are seizing resources from the poorest and most unstable countries in Africa, South America, and the Middle East. Switzerland keeps its country clean, lush, and without a single polluting smokestack. But the wealth they accumulate is created by hollowing out the earth in places thousands of kilometers away. Most notably, gold. Switzerland does not mine gold, but nearly 70% of the world's gold must pass through Swiss refineries before being distributed worldwide. From blood gold bars in mines, exploiting child labor, to smuggled gold from war zones. All of it, when passing through the smelters of the Alps, is melted down, washed clean of stains, and stamped with a shiny, legal and pure Swiss-made seal. The concept of Swiss neutrality is, in a sense, a privilege bought by turning a blind eye to the suffering of the rest of the world. They do not start wars, but they know how to optimize profits from every human disturbance. Yet nature's karma spares no one. Right now, Switzerland's eternal fortress is facing an enemy that no bunker system, no banking law, and no vast sum of money can resist. It is the revenge of Mother Nature. The Alps, the great rampart that has protected Switzerland for thousands of years, are slowly dying. Global warming is causing Switzerland's glaciers to melt at a terrifying speed. In just the past 2 years, Switzerland has lost 10% of its total ice reserves, a figure that previously would have taken decades to occur. The melting of glaciers does not just destroy scenic beauty or threaten the ski tourism industry, it directly threatens the very life of this nation. Beneath the rock layers of the Alps lies permafrost, a layer of perpetual ice. This ice layer acts as a giant type of cement, gluing the mountain rock masses together. When temperatures rise, this cement layer melts. As a result, giant mountains are literally crumbling. In the summer, the loud bangs echoing through the valleys are not military gunfire, but the sound of thousands of tons of giant rocks detaching from the mountain slopes, thundering down onto the villages below. The village of Brienz in eastern Switzerland is a tragic example. An entire mountain above the village is sliding down at a speed of tens of meters per year. Authorities have had to order an emergency evacuation of all residents. The Swiss people, those who always believed their country was the safest place in the world, now must pack up and flee from the very homes left by their ancestors, helplessly watching the mountains swallow their homeland. Even the legendary Matterhorn Peak, the proud symbol printed on Toblerone chocolate packaging, is shaking and developing massive cracks. The Swiss once planted explosives throughout the Alps to prevent enemies from entering, but they never expected that global warming would automatically detonate that mountain range from within. The fresh water supply is being threatened, and the hydroelectric system, the energy heart of Switzerland, faces the risk of drying up. Their greatest fortress wall is collapsing. Facing this existential crisis, exquisite watchmaking or safes filled with gold suddenly become meaningless. Switzerland is standing at the most brutal crossroads in its history. What must they do to save this fortress when the enemy does not come from outside the borders, but from the very atmosphere we are all breathing? But if you think that the collapse of the glaciers or the end of the banking secrecy era will knock this nation down, then perhaps you have forgotten who the Swiss truly are. They are the descendants of those who survived through thousands of brutal winters on steep cliffs. The greatest instinct of the Swiss is not defense, but adaptation. Whenever backed into a corner, the genome of master mechanics is activated. They do not sit and wait for the Alps to collapse. They are finding ways to rebuild the entire future. And to see that source of regenerative power, we must move away from the tree-lined avenues of Geneva, leaving behind the glittering financial districts of Zurich. We will board a brilliant red-painted train called the Bernina Express, plunging straight into the wildest heart of this country. Through countless dark tunnels and cloud-covered passes, the train takes us to Graubünden, the largest, highest, but most sparsely populated canton in Switzerland. Here, hidden among valleys cut off from the outside world, exists a precious gem that even many Europeans have never heard of: the world of the Romansch. Romansch is Switzerland's fourth language, an ancient dialect originating from the Latin of ancient Roman soldiers who were lost in the Alps 2,000 years ago. Today, less than 1% of the Swiss population, about 60,000 people, use this language. Entering the villages in Engadin within the Graubünden region, you will find yourself stepping back in time. The houses here are not fragile wooden huts. They are miniature fortresses with plaster-covered stone walls up to a meter thick to withstand the biting cold, with funnel-shaped windows carved deep into the walls to gather every rare ray of winter sunshine. On the facades of the houses are beautiful frescoes etched into the plaster called sgraffito. They are not just decorative patterns, but living dictionaries, recording folk tales, blessings, and the history of a resilient culture that refuses to be assimilated by the modern world. And if Graubünden is the gem of history, then Lauterbrunnen Valley is Mother Nature's greatest masterpiece. The name Lauterbrunnen means many springs. True to its name, this place possesses 72 giant waterfalls, plunging vertically from cliffs thousands of meters high down to the lush green valley floor. The scenery here possesses a surreal, magnificent, and overwhelming beauty to the extent that, in 1911, a young man named J.R.R. Tolkien hiked through here. The awe of this valley was etched deep into his mind, so that decades later, he used Lauterbrunnen itself as the prototype to write the legendary elven kingdom of Rivendell in his masterpiece, The Lord of the Rings. Traveling a bit further south, passing through the Gotthard Tunnel, you will gape in amazement at seeing tropical palm trees. Welcome to the canton of Ticino. It is still Switzerland, but here people speak Italian, drink wine on the shores of Lake Maggiore, bright pastel-colored buildings bathe in the Mediterranean sun, and a slow, romantic pace of life completely overrides the rigidity of the German-speaking region. Switzerland, in its most remote corners, is a multicolored mosaic far beyond anyone's imagination. But those surreal beauties are under threat. The Swiss know it, and instead of praying, they choose to use science to save the world. Do you remember the peasant watchmakers in the Jura Mountains who sharpened tiny clock gears? Today, their descendants are not just learning about time, they are seeking to decode the very existence of the universe. 100 meters underground, spanning the border between Switzerland and France, is the largest, most expensive, and most complex machine humanity has ever built, the European Organization for Nuclear Research, CERN. Here, inside the 27-kilometer-long Large Hadron Collider, scientists force protons to collide with each other at speeds approaching the speed of light. They are trying to recreate the Big Bang on a microscopic scale to find the God particle, the final piece of the puzzle that explains how matter in the universe was formed. The Swiss have moved from crafting time-measuring machines to crafting a machine that perceives the origins of space and time. And while CERN tackles the equations of the universe, the rest of Switzerland is working hard to solve Earth's survival problems. To cope with the melting of the Alps, Switzerland has birthed the most daring climate tech startups. Their company, Climeworks, has built massive plants that act like giant vacuum cleaners for the atmosphere. These machines suck carbon dioxide directly from the air, compress it, and then pump it deep underground to mix with water, turning toxic greenhouse gases into permanent rocks. They are literally stuffing human emissions back into the Earth's crust. What about the banking system, currently shaky due to the loss of secrecy privileges? Once again, the instinct for adaptation speaks up. If the world no longer allows assets to be hidden in the shadows of anonymous accounts, Switzerland will lead a financial system that doesn't need banks. The quiet lakeside city of Zug is now dubbed by the world as Crypto Valley. By pioneering a transparent legal framework for blockchain and cryptocurrency, Zug has attracted thousands of the world's leading decentralized tech companies to gather here. The Swiss realized that the nature of the blockchain network, decentralized, independent, anonymous data encryption, and crowd consensus, is actually the system of autonomous cantons and Switzerland's direct democracy transformed into lines of computer code. They are repeating history. Whether it's physical gold or digital assets, whether it's underground stone bunkers or impenetrable encrypted blockchain networks, Switzerland always knows how to remain humanity's safest vault. Our journey has passed through the deepest valleys and the highest peaks. We have entered cold military bunkers, touched exquisite clock gears, walked through banks housing humanity's secrets, and stood before glaciers that are slowly vanishing. Now, as night falls over the Alpine fortress, let us return to the question we posed at the beginning. How could a barren piece of land, locked within the old continent, without a single gold mine or oil well, rise to become one of the most prosperous, safe, and perfect nations on the planet? The answer, ultimately, does not lie in the favor of nature. Switzerland's massive wealth was never naturally born from the ground. It was forged from the very harshness of fate. The treacherous mountain ranges that once imprisoned them eventually became a great rampart protecting them from the devastating fires of 2 world wars. The long, freezing winters that once threatened their lives taught them the absolute patience to craft the greatest timepieces. The extreme poverty that once forced them to sell their blood on battlefields became a painful lesson for them to create a democracy of compromise, neutrality, and a cherishing of peace more than any other nation. Yes, Switzerland is not perfect. Beneath that glamorous veneer and suffocating order, there are still dark corners. There are still controversial moral legacies regarding money from unknown sources, the cold loneliness in expensive apartments, and the death sentence that climate change is handing down to their own home mountains. This great incubator at times is also a prison that confines the soul. Yet, rising above all those flaws, Switzerland remains a great testament to human survival power and wisdom. They remind the world of a harsh but inspiring truth. Adversity is not a life sentence. You cannot choose where you are born. You cannot move the mountains blocking your view. But you can learn how to tunnel through them. You can use wisdom, compromise, and iron discipline to make adversity serve you. At this edge of Europe, on eternal snow-capped peaks that seem forgotten by time, history is still being written. The Swiss did not just learn to survive with time. They measure it, master it, and turn it into their priceless legacy. The world out there may still be submerged in illness and turmoil. Empires may rise and fall, wars may break out and fade away. But deep in the heart of the Alps, beneath the white layers of snow and the solid rock formations, the gears are still quietly turning, precise, enduring, and never stopping.